Welcome to the Left of Str8 Show, where we talk entertainment, music, books, foodies, and more each week with special guest interviews of interest to the LGBTQ community and our straight allies. Direct from the entertainment capital of Northeast Ohio. Your host, Scott Fullerton, chats with some of your favorite entertainers, celebrities, newsmakers, and behind-the-scenes people across the country and around the world who make it all happen. So sit back, grab your favorite beverage, and let's start talking.
Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, listeners of all identities, welcome back to the Left of Str8 Show Interviews. I'm your host, as always, Scott Fullerton. Today, I am honored to host an award-winning author whose literary contributions have left an indelible mark in the world of fiction. As if that wasn't enough, she's also lived previous lives as a criminal defense attorney, a bass guitar player in a rock band, and a teacher. Talk about your Rennaisance woman. Karen Michaelson's a brilliant mind behind the Enemy Glory trilogy, and her newest book, The Maenad's God, has been a huge success for her as well. I'm excited to talk to Karen all about these previous lives, and then we'll dig deep into this new book, her inspirations, her process, and her experiences, all in the literary world. So sit back and enjoy, and let's welcome for the very first time to the show, Miss Karen Michalson. Karen, how are we doing today?
Good. That was quite an introduction. I'm kind of embarrassed.
Well, you are quite impressive in the literary field and of all your other accomplishments. Goodness gracious. From lawyer to teacher to Indian chief to rock and roller. I'm loving it.
I've tried a lot of different paths. I've done a lot of different paths. They don't all work out.
It's fun to be a dabbler. I enjoy to dabble, so that's good. And 10 years plus isn't just a dabble, believe me. Well, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you and talk about the book, but I always like to start off with a couple of questions for first-timers. First thing is, where did you grow up and what kind of a kid were you growing up? When did you kind of get interested in writing, or was that later on down the line?
I grew up in upstate New York, near Syracuse. The kind of kid I was probably, I was academically inclined, very much a nerd, the kind of kid that gets picked on. I used to read a lot as a kid. I still do. And as to writing, I originally saw myself as a literary critic. And I went to college for that. And I went through to grad school, and I wanted to be an English professor. I'd write all these cool scholarly treatises. And I did go down that path. My first book was academic, and it was a study of the canon in Victorian England in the late 19th century and canon making. And an odd thing happened after that book was published, and I was still looking for a tenure-track job, which this is kind of a story. I was sitting at my computer, and I remember to this day, it was June, it was a Sunday afternoon, and my husband was mowing the lawn outside, which is kind of irrelevant maybe. And I just started writing at my computer, and I wasn't even really sure what I was doing. I was just playing around. And in my mind, I had a mental image of a young man with a sword to his chest, and he was telling his life story to his enemy. And I wasn't really sure what the hell this was until I finished writing maybe 10, 15, 20 pages. And I was reading through it, and I'm like, I'm writing fiction. And I'd never really written fiction before. I'd always been a critic. But that was the beginning of the Enemy Glory trilogy. And it took me by storm. It just hooked me, and I wanted to write fiction. And it was after that I got offers to teach. And the funny thing is once I started teaching, I really kept doing the fiction as much as I could, and I left a tenure track position within a year or two because I just wanted to do the fiction. It was that strong a pull. So that's how I started writing fiction. I don't know. That's a story.
I love hearing that draw. That's amazing. I like that a lot. Well, second question I always ask is primarily towards my LGBTQ community. I ask them where they found their tribe. We've talked about your husband. He built that beautiful bookcase behind you. Where did you, and these two characters in your latest book we'll talk about are two guys that have a romantic connection there. Where have you kind of found your LGBTQ community and kind of made you want to write about that community?
Well, I don't see myself as a member of any community. I'm very much a loner. However, it was writing the book that kind of opened up to me a lot of, I don't know, insights into myself that maybe I didn't have previously, or I had them. But I'll just say this. I know when I was a child, I don't even know how to describe it. I had a certain way of seeing myself that I thought was unique to me because I didn't know anybody else that did that. I grew up in the 60s and 70s. I'm older. As I wrote the book, it just felt right. But what felt, I think even before I wrote Maenad, the Enemy Glory trilogy is told from a male point of view too. Llewellyn is speaking in first person for 3 books. And that just felt really natural to me. And the male point of view as a fiction writer became stronger. And that's kind of where I ended up maybe identifying, but I don't really identify with a label. I don't want to,
Sure.
I don't know. I think fiction writers, some of us, a lot of people, I don't like the word channel, but I guess I could use it.
Right.
Things that are,
Well, yeah, it's great to have allies that kind of will share that experience and are able to write that experience, because there's a lot of gay people that just aren't that great writers either. We have some great authors and we have some not. So you need to have a full conference of that. And one of the things that I really like, I think, is I just talked about it. In fact, in my other podcast, talking about the week's events, that a lot of gay fiction is straight female written, and it's just kind of amazing to have these kind of allies out there that write that experience. So it's kind of a new genre in and of itself.
well, it's hard to explain. I mean, if I'm being totally honest, I really feel that I fall somewhere between T and Q or something like that. But I don't have a particular label for myself. Sometimes I feel like I'm genderless. Sometimes I just feel like I don't even really have one. Other times I'm absolutely sure if I do, it's not female. And I know when I write, I feel the most like myself, and it's always male. And as a child, I would always in my mind identify with male characters constantly. And I thought that was normal, but I never really talked about it. And now I know that's not really the usual thing for people. I don't know what I call myself. I've been outside.
I think labels are not needed a lot of time. I think it just being you is what's important. I think that's what's so great about it. And writing is writing, right? Great writing is great writing. So we appreciate anyone that just writes well. So there is no reason to identify. So I appreciate that. I want to start jumping into it. I mean, let's start with some past work. 10 years as a criminal defense attorney. Talk about that experience. I think I remember hearing somewhere that part of Enemy Glory kind of has to do with right and wrong and law and lawlessness. How does that time as a criminal defense attorney affect your writing, if at all?
Well, the criminal defense attorney came after I wrote the first 2 books in the trilogy.
Oh, okay.
I think the trilogy might have influenced that choice more than the other way around. Enemy Glory is certainly, the first 2 books anyway are structured around a trial, and the frame moves in and out of Llewellyn telling his enemy why he made particular decisions to embrace evil. And it was the enemy that was once his best friend, and the best friend betrayed him, and that was sort of what pushed Llewellyn to accept evil, and then he can't get out of that decision, and he has to destroy everything he ever loved in his past. And it exploits all that in law, politics, individual choice and its consequences. All of those things are in the trilogy. And after it was published, I made a decision that I was getting older then, maybe nearly 40 at that point, and I thought, I don't know, I need to do something normal. I've been playing music for 10 years, and I don't know why I succumbed to societal pressure, and I'm not sure I'm proud that I did, but I did. And that's when I went to law school and became an attorney. And that was a whole different experience, and I didn't do anything creative for about 10 or 12 years. And there came a point where I really felt I needed to do that again. And as to Maenad, the Maenad's God, that's the title, everybody. And I'll show the book so people can see the book. Here we are. That's the Maenad's God. I had written a much longer version prior to law school. And it was after law school. I'm looking at this manuscript. It was over 800 pages because that's another project that just went crazy. And decided, it's been in my closet forever. I really want to put this out in the world. And that's when I hired an editor. And his name is John Weiss, and he's wonderful. And he looked at it, and he worked, with me on, what can we cut? How can we get this down to something manageable? Because a lot of it went on and on and on about all kinds of things. And this is the version that I put out now. So it was Maenad that influenced me to become a bass player. I mean, this is the thing with books. I write about them, and then they influence me to do it in my real life or something. It's like this thing that happens. I don't know.
Well, that's what these connections were so wild to me, and I thought they were so kind of cosmetically brought together. You talk about how that fiction just kind of came to you before the book ever came, and now you're writing this other way. And from what I remember, it was something like you had a vision of what a bass guitar looked like, and kind of a vision of what this happening before this book ever came to it. So you have these visions along with it. That has to be just a wild experience in and of itself.
I have to say they're not visions. I mean, because some people call me out on that. Oh, you hallucinate, or you psychic. No. It's not that. But I kept getting this mental image, and I couldn't shake it. And when I get these images in my head, they feel like a character as opposed to a memory or a fantasy. They do feel different. And this character I saw before I wrote The Maenad's God was a man in his late 20s, and he was sitting on my living room floor. And he was playing a bass guitar, but I didn't know what a bass guitar was because I didn't play music at that point in time. And I asked my spouse if he knew. I described it, 4 strings. And since he used to play guitar when he was much younger, he's like, yeah, that sounds like bass. So I said, please, I want to see one. So he took me out to a club, and it was a band, and they're playing blues and 50s stuff and fun stuff. And he said, that's a bass. I'm like, yeah, that's a bass. And I knew to write this character who became Jade in the book, I needed to understand what that all was. So I started learning bass, and I got involved in playing in bands so I called myself in another interview kind of an embedded reporter, so I could see what it was like to be in a rock band. And I learned so much. I learned how bandmates do and don't get along. I learned equipment. I learned what it's like to eventually Bill, my spouse, picked guitar back up again because I was playing bass, and we formed a band, and we went touring, and we did all this. And a lot of that came into the book, like the equipment that gets used and what things feels like. And I did a lot of research into how the music business works on the inside. There's a ton of stuff in there about the mafia and the music business. The mafia, I drew somewhat, I probably shouldn't say this, but I had a grandfather who was mob adjacent. And it's not like I really was exposed to that a lot when I grew up, very little of it, but the stories were there. And the ethic and the feel I remember seeing and occasionally getting glimpses of. I still had to do a lot of research on it on my own, but that came through. And a lot of stuff got put together. And originally I thought Jade would be the main character because, I mean, that's all I saw. And then and I said to write it, I kept writing this, and there's like this other voice I kept writing, and I'm like, oh, there's another guy, and he's an FBI agent. And I had to go learn everything I could about that. So I don't know.
I think it's funny when you say about the mob. I'm living here about 15 miles from Youngstown, Ohio, which is very much known for mobster. And I remember I moved here because my dad grew up here. And so his parents still lived here. We'd come visit him. They moved to California, and we were born and raised in California. So we'd come visit my grandparents out here. And I remember distinctly one summer coming out here, and my uncle taking me to this guy's garage that had two like closets full of 45 records and stuff. Said, "You pick out wherever you want." And I said, "These are wonderful. Where'd you get them?" "We don't ask where he got them. You just pick out whatever albums you want." Very good. I don't need to ask any more questions. So
Yeah, you always get the best wine around Christmas time, and
exactly.
yeah.
I like that. That's very funny. Well, Taka, and your husband was in your band with you. Is he part of your writing at all? Do you kind of run things by him at all, or what does he do?
He's not part of the fiction writing, but in the band, sure, we write music together. I mean, bass and
That's
guitar.
awesome.
I don't play guitar, and through this saying, "Oh, you must," there's this stereotype, which is not true. And I want to say this from the beginning, but there are some people that think, "Oh, if you're the bass player, it must be because you were the weakest guitar player in the band." I always played bass. I never was a guitar player, but he plays guitar. So together we collectively have written a lot of songs. And the CDs we released were based on my Enemy Glory trilogy. So the lyrics are mine and the concept is mine because they follow the books. But maybe at some point we'll put together a Maenad CD. I don't know. I feel weird about that because it's about a band and I don't, But I have written one song. Back at some of, we put out a a CD called The Sorrows of Young Apollo. And it's an exploration of the Apollo and the Dionysian myth cycle. And there is one song on there, looking back, I'm thinking, that could have been a Maenad song. It's called Asphodel, but the other songs really aren't. They're just based in myth. Well, the book is too. I mean, I should talk about the book. The Maenad Scott is a blend of reality and myth. And it's about a alienated FBI agent named Pete, who has a very dark, cynical look at everybody in the world. He's been an agent. He's seen some things. He basically just isolates himself and reads classics, and he loves art and literature because it brings him out of the ugliness, the cesspool of the FBI. And then one day he gets sent near the beginning of the novel on what he thinks is a nothing case to this really strange, almost abandoned military base near Utica, New York. Not sure what's going on. There's a rock band playing. And he finds himself becoming obsessed with the bass player. Now, Pete's never been in love before. He doesn't, I mean, the big thing is he's struck with this love for this man, but he doesn't know what love is, let alone anything else. And so what occurs to him, not so much as, that he's in a relationship with another man, which he will be throughout the rest of the book, but he's taken by surprise. He can connect with anybody. And it turns out that Jade, of course, brings him fantasy, literature, living fantasies, his dreams, helps him become who he is inside. And I really think a lot of what this explores in this book is this idea that we really have two lives. We have these lives inside us where we know who we are. And that's kind of what I'm talking around in circles when I used to identify with male characters. But society tells you you're not that, right? Often, or at least when I was growing up, that was the case. Mm-hmm. Or you sense that you're not that, or that it wouldn't be accepted as that. And then there's the outside life that we're all kind of forced into, sometimes bitch slapped into. I mean, who we are inside is very different. And what Jade does is he brings us out in Pete. And he recognizes this as love, and they form a love affair, but they do have to stay secret about it. Not just because it's 1992 in the book, but because Jade is being bankrolled by the mob. He's in a mafia band. And Pete has a history with this particular mafia family. He's put some of them in jail. They would be very happy if Pete disappeared from the face of the earth. So they got to be careful for this reason. And that's like one of the points of tension. Now, one of the things that unfolds is this whole other subplot of art, creativity versus entropy. There's this this magical realism in the book. And in some sense, Jade and his bandmates may have been playing brilliant music forever. Jade is regarded by the people that have known him forever as possibly the son of a Greek divinity. And that trope is ancient. It's not mine. It comes from the Iliad. It comes from the Odyssey. I mean, you read the Iliad, and the warriors in the Iliad they're more skillful than the others are described as being, a son of Zeus or a son of this or that. Did the Greeks take that literally? I'm not prepared to say, but I'm sure some of them did, and some of them recognized it as metaphor. But there's this whole mythic aspect where Pete is caught between Jade and his relatives that are pushing creativity in the art, and this other side of this villain, I suppose, named Hugh McCrae, who describes himself as an ancient titan. And he's very comfortable with the fact he's entropy. He wants things to just ooze into nothingness. And Pete's in the middle, and there's a war between this that's been going on for centuries. This war between creativity and conformity. And I think that almost becomes more of an important theme than anything else in the book. And
I love looking into it because I am a huge fan of mythology. I mean, that's been an interest of mine forever. And I'm also a big fan of wine. So we have the two combined very well there. We have mythology and wine together there with Dionysus. So I was intrigued just by the title alone of the book before I started digging into it. But I absolutely love kind of reading those subtexts and subplots into it. I thought it was very well written. Just amazing. And it seems like it's getting some great reviews. Are you happy with you see this? I mean, we got a trilogy for the first book. Do you see this these characters moving on in other ways?
I'd like them to, because I'm unabashedly in love with the characters. And I mean, all of them. Even Hugh McCrae, I think they all have their point. They're all of their part. You can't have a universe without entropy. So they're all very important to me. And I am working on a Maenad too. I'm going in different directions with it, and I'm not really sure where it's going to settle out. But I really think there is more to the story. And Pete is left, I don't want to give spoilers, he's left in a particular place that is quite dark, but maybe has some shred of light in it. And I want to see what happens from there. When you get from there, how do you get somewhere else? And I'm working up something with it. That would be what I hope I finish.
Right.
But
I hope so. I mean, I'm looking forward. I haven't finished the whole book yet. I've just read different experts. Enemy Glory I'm looking forward to, because to be honest, it gave me almost homage type to Anne Rice, having from a point of view of a character who's dying and a trilogy and everything. So I kind of thought Interview with a Vampire a little bit, talking about your own mortality and the way your character went through that and being the trilogy part of it. I thought this is very interesting in an entirely different way. So I'm really looking forward to reading that as well.
Oh, great. Well, thank you for reading the Maenad Scott. I'm really appreciative of that.
I thought it was amazing. And we're actually going to give our listeners, I mean, so thanks to you, we're going to give 3 people a chance to get a copy of the book that we're going to have sent out. So we'll talk about that at the end here, while they can have a chance to maybe win a copy here. But I like the way you approach these characters. I'm very interested about you. I mean, through your band, you created your own label for your band. You created your own label for your books. Talk about taking all this on yourself. It's got to be so much more work for you, but is the reward worth it as well? Because that's a lot of work to kind of self-publish all this. Talk about what you've had to learn in the learning curve and all of that.
Well, it is a lot of work. I will say my academic book and my first 2 trilogy books were at a traditional publishing house, so I've been there. And when I decided to self-publish, it was with the experience of having been at a traditional publishing house. I had to be honest with myself. Creative control is important to me, and you don't necessarily have that when you get signed. The kinds of stories I want to write, like the Maenad Scott, are not genre specific. This is a combination of literary fiction, psychological thriller, mythology. These are areas that people don't usually combine, because they're more difficult for a large house to market. I mean, what large houses want, and there's nothing wrong with this, is this is a romance, this is a thriller, these are the audience, this is the channel. And I don't want to limit myself for my books to that. So in that sense, it was a pretty obvious answer which way I wanted to go with it. In terms of doing everything myself, yeah, it can be. I mean, I chose the name of my label, and my book publishing name, Arula, is named after a city in the Enemy Glory trilogy. Arula is a city that the Elves abandoned many, many thousands of years ago. But when they lived there, that was the repository of their works of art and their creativity. And then they left it to ruins, and people find these beautiful objects that are forgotten and left. And I said, that's what I'm going to call my label. That's what I'm going to call my books. And
I'm glad. I was going to ask that question because I was wondering where the name came from. Because when I looked it up, it's kind of like the base of something, and from them, so I thought I can see where that parallel comes in too, where that city being the base of the stored knowledge. So I like how all that kind of combines together. And publishing anymore, I mean, you've got to know much better than I, but they don't pay for publicity tours anymore. They don't do a lot of other things. So you're on your own a lot of the time anyway, right? I mean, they do have some.
that's exactly right. I mean, when you say, is it difficult? It's like, it's in some ways it's easier, because if you are signed to a publishing house, not only are you expected to do all this anyway, you're expected to do it the way they want you to do it. But you're doing it at your own expense. I mean, I've heard many stories of writers getting advances and then being strongly encouraged to use an advance to fund their publicity efforts. And you have to think about this. If you're going to do all that and then get 10% of your sales because the publisher's going to take everything else, why do it? Why not keep all of your sales? Why not just do it for yourself? Control everything. And, you know, there are some difficulties self-publishing. Of course there are. I mean, there's certain venues that, you know, prefer to deal with the big five or whatever. But I mean, I feel for me, it's worth it. And to be able to write books that do combine all these different things together is worth it. And I'm putting the stories out there I want to put out there.
No, I can definitely understand that. And like you said, once the story is the motivator, right? So once you find those readers and they start finding other readers, and that's how things kind of get talked about now anyway. So I think I find self-publishing very important, actually, in today's day and age.
The
There's some
relationship
disadvantage.
with the characters that I have in my head is the big motivator too. And I have a better relationship when it's just me.
Right.
And not in a whole, you know, whatever, a whole publishing house. I've been down that road, you know.
And you have been doing your own kind of like little book tours and book signings and things. How do you find that? Do you like getting out amongst the readers and everything? Is that fun for you? Is that kind of the publicity job of it? How's that part of it for you?
I love meeting readers. I love having conversations about things that they might see in a book, and just talking to people that my whole thing is being able to share this world with other people. So that's fine. But publicity is very time consuming, and it can be a lot of work. So
Right.
I try to be balanced and divide that with writing new stuff. But I do love meeting readers. I really do.
Well, it's such, like I said, for everything that I've read so far is amazing. In Maenad's Gods, I love that. I can't wait to read the other trilogy. Talk about where you come up with names for characters and things like that. How do you kind of, once you get this idea that comes to you either through some kind of graphic in your head or something, how do you kind of start building it out from there? Where do you go to kind of pull some background in the character? How much research do you have to put into these?
As to names, the names come with the character. It's hard to explain. But when I was getting the image of Jade, I got his name. It was later I got his last name when I needed it in the book. And
That's cool.
I remember, you know, when I realized that it's not going to be him telling the story, the guy's name was Pete. I don't know. They all come the way they come. As to planning it out, I follow the characters. I mean, everybody writes differently. There's no one way to write.
Right.
But I feel like if I'm not surprised, the reader won't be. which sounds a lot like something I think Robert Frost once said, no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader. My
True.
riff on that, no surprise in the writer, no surprise in the reader. And I don't mean that literally because, like I said, everyone works differently and you could totally map everything out and totally surprise your readers. I'm not saying this is the only way to do it, but for me, it's like, wow, he said this? Cool. And I know there's like, go with it. Whatever.
And are you a disciplined writer? Do you have to sit down at your desk so many hours a day, or do you do it as the inspiration comes, or what's your writing process?
I do sit every day. It doesn't mean every day I get good stuff lately. And I'm okay. I do. And this is something that James Pressfield writes about in The War of Art, which I think is like a holy Bible. I think every creator ought to read The War of Art. And he talks about invoking the muse. And some people might find that to be crazy, but I really feel like if before you write or engage in a creative project, if you do kind of center yourself on this ancient image of creativity. The muses were the daughters of Zeus, and they were the followers of Apollo, and they presided over the arts. It does center me somewhat to open to get something. But it's more like if I do it, I think it just tells my mind, okay, it's time to write now. And again, it doesn't mean I'm going to get anything good, but it does mean that this is writing time. Close the door for a few hours.
That's so well said, though, about the creative and reaching out to creative divine. I believe in that 100%. And everything comes through some kind of divine will. You never know what it's going to be through art, even through your business and things like that. You never know. It's just kind of what you believe and your perception and how things come to you kind of help shape your experience, right?
Yeah, well, can I say something about that? I think we're all really creative people. And I think in most cases that creativity gets slapped out of us. And I think we're all born with this way of being that is like putting things together that didn't exist before. That's creativity, taking a lump of clay and making a statue that didn't exist before. But it's not just the traditional arts, it's everything. You can be creative at just any human endeavor. But thinking for yourself, thinking critically, not following the herd, you can pay a penalty for that. You really can. And I think a lot of people suppress that and lose that inner self, that inner life. So I think this would be good for everybody to invoke the muse, whatever is important to them. I think it's important.
Well said. And I think some of the best writers are also voracious readers. Obviously, behind you, you have all sorts of books. How often do you find yourself getting inspired just by some of the books you've read?
Oh, I'm always getting inspired. And lately I've been going through a huge Hellenic reading jag. Fitzgerald's translations of the Iliad and the Odyssey. And now I'm reading the Homeric hymns. It's a different translation it's not Fitzgerald's, it's somebody else. But yeah, I do get inspired, and I do have my favorite writers, and they change all the time. I think I have said in recent interviews, Roberto Colasso is one of my favorites. I think if you were to ask me today, for some reason, I'd say Oscar Wilde. I love Oscar Wilde. I love Walter Pater, Ruskin, all the Victorians, because that's really where my roots are. Shelley and Byron. Been looking at Shelley lately too. I learned from all of them. And I agree with what Emily Dickinson said. Emily Dickinson said when she was reading, she knew she was reading a poem because she could feel the top of her head coming off. I think in a really well-written poem, you can feel that. It's almost physical. You want to put the book down and pace. It's like, yeah, what did I just read, So that's
Definitely.
I'm inspired by all of it. It depends. I just read around everything.
Now, we just kind of brushed on your teaching. Do you ever feel the draw to need to teach again, maybe in this new genre now, not the British literature or anything, but do you find the desire to ever want to teach?
No, I don't. I remember when I was teaching feeling really pressed for time by trying to teach and write at the same time, and I prefer writing. I don't feel, maybe literature as opposed to writing itself. I don't feel the draw to teaching. I don't know. I just don't. I thought that's what I wanted, and then it wasn't.
Right. That's a good thing, is we can always, like I said, we talked about trying these different things out and starting to know yourself by knowing what you like, what you dislike, and being honest about what you like and dislike too. I think the most important thing you do is to be honest with yourself, right?
I'm glad you said that. And the older I get, the more I have to be honest with myself. And while I was practicing law, there came a point where I was honest with myself that I wanted to write again. And that's when I eased off my practice and eventually closed it. And I wrote The King's Glory, which finished off the Enemy Glory trilogy. And it was almost an epilogue to Llewellyn's adventures. And there is a bard in that book who I think was really important to me too. Her name is Erin. And I think people can read Erin and judge for themselves. But she kind of moves between genders too, in ways that I thought was interesting for the novel, for the trilogy. As a storyteller, she kind of inhabits lots of different perspectives and does so. It's not always easy for her or him, depending on what she or he is wearing in that particular scene, that particular time in the book. And that
Very, very good.
Brought me back to, I'm going to put Maenad out at 158 pages. Nobody will read this, so what can I do with it? And I went through a lot of...
I think they're enjoying every second of it. Well, Karen Michaelson, has been great being able to talk to you today. Thank you so much. You have a fantastic website, too. Let everyone know where they can find your website.
It's at KarenMichaelson.com, and The Maenad's God is available on Amazon. And if you go to my website, you'll find a whole list of other retailers, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, Apple, every place online, some physical stores, and they're listed on the website as well. And so please check it out. Drop me a line. There's a contact form. I'd love to hear from you.
There you go. We are going to start a Left of Str8 book club. We'll have to make it our first book selection. I like it.
That's great.
All right. Well, thank you very much for being on the show. I appreciate it, Karen. Stick around because we're going to do little 5 questions with Karen for later on. You'll be able to see next Tuesday. And a couple lucky listeners. Karen said she's going to send out a book or two to a couple of you listeners. So if it's something that sounds like it's real of interest to you, which I think you're going to enjoy immensely, send me a message through Instagram or on the website, and we will get this over to Karen, and she'll send this out to you. Thank you for that, Karen.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to send copies to listeners.
All right, well, stay on the line. I'm looking forward to finishing the book myself. I have a lot of it done already, but I'm going to finish it up here. Guys, you're listening to Left of Str8 here, right on the Left of Str8 Radio Network. We will see you next week, and look for 5 questions with Karen next Tuesday. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you for having me on the show, Scott.
Anytime. Thank you, Karen.
Thanks for listening to The Left of Str8 Show. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast distributor, and please give us a 5-star rating so more listeners can find us. You can follow us on social media, and be sure to check out our website, www.leftofstraightradio.com, for contests and other news and information. See you next week.